The sun rose slowly over the Bennett farm, painting the sky with soft colors of orange and pink. The field stretched as far as the eyes could see, glowing under the early morning light. Cows were grazing quietly, and the sound of roosters echoed across the valley. Among the tall fences and the golden hay, a young woman named Lila Bennett stood, holding a small bucket of feed. Her hands were rough from work, yet her eyes held a warmth that spoke of a gentle heart. Lila was different from most girls in her town. She didn't dream of fancy dresses or city life. She loved the earth beneath her boots, the smell of horses, and the freedom of the open sky. But she also dreamed of something more, something her father would never understand. Her father, Thomas Bennett, was a proud and stubborn man. He had built the family farm from the ground up, through years of sweat and sacrifice. He believed in hard work, discipline, and keeping the family name respected in town. To him, life was simple. Follow the rules, protect your honor, and never step outside what was expected. Lila, however, was full of curiosity and imagination. She would often sneak away after finishing her chores, riding her chestnut horse, Daisy, to the river that ran beyond the property. It was her secret place where she could breathe, think, and dream. There she would lie in the grass, watch the clouds, and imagine a world where love mattered more than status, and kindness mattered more than pride. One afternoon, while riding back from the river, she saw a stranger by the edge of her father's land. He was repairing a fence post that had broken during the storm the night before. His hat shaded his face, but his movements were strong and steady. His horse, a tall gray stallion, stood nearby. Lila stopped for a moment, curious. "You're on Bennett land," she said, her voice steady but polite. The man looked up, his eyes calm and kind. "Just fixing a fence," he said with a small smile. "Didn't want the cattle to wander through." Lila frowned slightly. "You don't work for my father?" "No, ma'am," he said, tipping his hat. "Name's Caleb Walker. I'm from the Walker Ranch, just across the ridge. Thought I'd help out. Storm did a bit of damage to both our sides." There was something about his voice, steady, warm, and respectful, that caught her attention. Most men in town spoke with pride or arrogance, but Caleb sounded honest. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'll tell my father." "Much appreciated," he replied, giving a small nod before returning to his work. As Lila rode away, she couldn't help but glance back. There was something in Caleb's calmness that stayed with her. Over the next few weeks, their paths crossed more often. Sometimes at the market, other times at the church gatherings or near the border of their lands. Each time they exchanged polite words that soon turned into friendly conversations. Caleb told her stories about life on his ranch, the struggles, the long rides, the quiet nights under the stars. Lila listened with wonder. She had lived her whole life in one place, but he had seen so much more of the world. One evening, when the sun was setting and the sky burned with gold, Caleb found her by the riverbank. She was sitting on a rock, tossing small stones into the water. "You come here often?" he said, walking his horse slowly toward her. She smiled. "It's my favorite place. Feels like the world stops here." Caleb dismounted and sat a few feet away. "My mother used to say that peace isn't found in places. It's found in moments like this." Lila looked at him curiously. "You miss her?" He nodded. "Every day. She used to hum while cooking. Said a quiet heart was stronger than a loud one." Something about that sentence touched her deeply. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the soft flow of the river. It was a silence that didn't need to be broken. It was comfortable, full of understanding. Weeks turned into months, and what began as a friendship slowly blossomed into something more. Lila found herself smiling whenever she saw him ride by. Caleb, too, began finding excuses to visit the Bennett land, offering to help fix fences or deliver hay. But happiness rarely goes unnoticed. One evening, as Lila returned home from the market, she found her father waiting on the porch. His face was stern, his jaw tight. "Where were you?" he demanded. "I went to town," she said softly. "With that Walker boy again?" His tone was sharp. Lila froze. "Caleb just helped me carry some things. That's all." Thomas slammed his fist against the railing. "I told you before, I don't want you talking to him." Those ranch hands wander from place to place. They're not dependable, and they have no name worth carrying. Lila's eyes filled with hurt. "He's not like that, Father. He's a good man. You don't even know him." "I know his kind," Thomas snapped. "And I won't have my daughter throwing away her dignity for a drifter." The words stung like fire. "I'm not throwing anything away," she said quietly. I just want to be happy. Her father's voice grew colder. Happiness doesn't build a home. Respect does. And if you keep acting like this, you'll bring shame to this family. That night, Lila lay awake staring at the ceiling. She could hear the rain tapping softly against the window. Her father's words echoed in her mind: shame, dignity, disgrace. But in her heart, she knew there was nothing shameful about kindness or love. The next morning, she rode out early before the sun rose. Caleb was already by the river waiting with his horse. "You look troubled," he said gently. She sighed. "My father found out about us. He doesn't want me to see you again." Caleb's expression softened. "I figured he wouldn't take kindly to me. I'm not the kind of man he'd choose for his daughter." She looked at him sadly. "You don't deserve his anger." He smiled faintly. "I can handle his anger. What I can't handle is seeing you hurt." Lila's heart fluttered. "I don't know what to do, Caleb. I can't keep lying to him. But I can't let go of you either." He took off his hat and held it against his chest. "Then don't. Sometimes you have to fight for the things that make life worth living." For a long moment they said nothing. The river flowed quietly beside them, and the wind brushed through the tall grass. In that stillness, something unspoken passed between them, something real and strong. From that day on, Lila's world changed. Every meeting with Caleb became a secret, every glance a risk. But with each moment, her heart grew braver. She began to see love not as something fragile, but as something powerful enough to stand against fear. Her father, however, began to notice her distant eyes, her quiet smiles, and the way she would hum while working. He knew something was changing, and it frightened him. One evening, as Lila helped him repair a wagon, he finally asked, "Do you love him?" She looked down, her fingers trembling. "Yes," she whispered. Her father went silent, his face turning pale. "Then you've brought disgrace upon this family." Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't argue. She simply walked away, her heart heavy yet certain. As the sun set behind her, she knew life on the Bennett farm would never be the same again. But deep inside, she also knew that the love growing in her heart was stronger than the fences around her father's land, and stronger than the word disgrace. It was only the beginning of a story that would test her courage, her heart, and her belief in love that could outlast pride. After that night, everything changed for Lila. The air in the Bennett house grew heavy with silence. Her father, Thomas, stopped speaking to her unless it was about work. The warmth that once filled their home had turned cold. Even her step across the old wooden floors seemed louder, as if the house itself could feel the distance between them. Lila tried her best to stay strong. She woke early, did her chores, and smiled for her younger brother and sister. But inside, her heart ached. Every time she saw the river beyond the hills, she thought of Caleb, of the way his voice softened when he spoke, of his eyes that held both kindness and courage. Days turned into weeks, and the longing in her heart only grew stronger. She often rode to the edge of her father's land, hoping to catch a glimpse of Caleb. Sometimes she would see him far away, riding along the fence line, his hat low over his eyes. He never came closer, not wanting to cause her more trouble, but just seeing him reminded her that love still lived quietly between them. One evening, dark clouds rolled over the valley. A storm was coming, wild and powerful. Lila stood by the window, watching the trees sway and the wind whip through the fields. Her father and brother had gone to secure the barn, and the sound of thunder echoed across the sky. She felt uneasy, her heart racing without knowing why. Then, through the pouring rain, she saw a familiar figure riding hard toward the house. Caleb. His coat was soaked. His horse's hooves splashed mud as he drew near. Before she could even move, her father stepped out onto the porch, his face dark with anger. Caleb stopped his horse and shouted over the rain, "I came to make sure you're safe. The river's rising fast. You need to move the livestock before it floods." Thomas's voice cut through the storm. "You have no right coming here. This is Bennett land, boy." Lila ran to the door. "Father, please. He's only trying to help." Thomas turned on her sharply. "Get inside, Lila." But Lila didn't move. She stood in the doorway, rain hitting her face, her eyes full of determination. "You don't have to like him," she said softly, "but you can't hate him for caring." Her father's anger boiled over. "You're defending him? After I told you what kind of man he is? You've brought shame to this family, Lila." His words struck like lightning, shame, disgrace, the same words that had haunted her for weeks. Her heart trembled and tears mixed with the rain on her cheeks. Caleb dismounted, stepping forward. Sir, I mean no harm. I respect you, and I'd never hurt your daughter. But there's danger near the river. You need to move your cattle. Thomas's jaw tightened. You think I need advice from a cowboy who owns nothing but a horse and a hat? Lila's voice shook. He owns something you don't, Father. Kindness. For a moment, silence filled the storm. The only sound was the rain and the thunder in the distance. Thomas's face hardened, and he pointed toward the gate. Get off my land. And you... He turned to Lila, his voice breaking. You're a disgrace to this family. The word cut through her like a blade. Her breath caught in her throat, and she felt the ground spin beneath her feet. Caleb looked at her, pain flashing in his eyes. Without another word, Lila turned and ran into the rain. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't stay there any longer. The storm surrounded her, the wind pulling at her clothes and hair. The world blurred with tears. Caleb rushed after her, calling her name. Lila, stop. You'll get lost. She didn't stop until she reached the riverbank. The same place where they had shared quiet moments and dreams. The river had grown wild, its water churning with force. Lila sank to her knees, sobbing. He hates me, Caleb. My own father thinks I'm nothing. Caleb knelt beside her, rain dripping from his hat. No, he said softly. You're not nothing, Lila. You're everything good this world needs. She shook her head. I've lost everything. My home, my father's love, my name. Caleb took her trembling hands in his. Then you still have me. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. You'd still want me? After all this? His voice was quiet but strong. Lila Bennett, if your father calls you a disgrace, then I'll call you my wife. The world seemed to stop. The rain softened, the thunder faded, and all that remained was the sound of the river and the steady beating of her heart. Lila stared at him, speechless. She wanted to believe him, to trust that love could be stronger than the hurt she felt. But Caleb, she whispered, we don't even have a plan. We have no money, no home of our own. He smiled gently. A home isn't built with money, Lila. It's built with faith, with work, and with love. We'll find our way. She looked at him for a long time, then finally nodded. For the first time in weeks, her tears turned into a small, trembling smile. Then I'll go wherever you go. Caleb helped her onto his horse, wrapping his coat around her shoulders. The rain had slowed to a mist, and the clouds began to part, letting soft light fall over the valley. They rode away from the Bennett farm, leaving behind the old fences and heavy silence that had kept her trapped for so long. As they rode, Lila looked back one last time. The house she had grown up in stood tall and proud against the gray sky, but it no longer felt like home. Home, she realized, wasn't made of walls or roofs. It was made of hearts that understood each other. They rode until the horizon turned gold again. When they finally stopped near Caleb's ranch, dawn was breaking. The smell of wet earth filled the air, and the first rays of sunlight touched the grass. Lila felt both exhausted and alive. Caleb dismounted and helped her down. We'll start here, he said. It won't be easy, but it'll be ours. She smiled through her tears. I don't care about easy. I just want real. He brushed a strand of hair from her face and looked at her with a softness that made her heart flutter. Then real is what you'll have. They spent that morning tending to the horses and drying off by the fire. Lila wrapped herself in a blanket, watching the flames dance. For the first time she felt safe, not because the world had suddenly become kind, but because she was beside someone who saw her worth when no one else did. But even in that peaceful moment, a part of her heart still ached for her father. She remembered the way he used to smile when she was little, the way he'd lift her onto his shoulders during harvest festivals. She wished things could go back to that. Caleb seemed to read her thoughts. He'll come around someday, he said quietly. Sometimes people take time to see what's right in front of them. Lila looked into the fire, her eyes glistening. I hope you're right. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind a fresh scent of rain and earth. The land glowed softly under the morning sun, and the sound of birds filled the air again. In that stillness, Lila made herself a silent promise. She would build a life worth being proud of, not to prove her father wrong, but to prove to herself that love could survive even the harshest storms. And as the day began, she held on to Caleb's words, the words that had lifted her from despair. If your father calls you a disgrace, then I'll call you my wife. They weren't just words of comfort. They were a a vow that would guide them through every trial to come. The morning sun shone softly on the valley as Lila stood outside the small cabin Caleb called home. It was quiet, with only the chirping of birds and the soft rustle of wind through the trees. The air smelled of damp earth after the storm, and the mountains in the distance glowed golden in the early light. For a moment, Lila closed her eyes and breathed deeply. This was freedom. No shouting, no judgment, no expectations, only the sound of nature and the calm strength of the man who had chosen to stand beside her when the world turned away. Caleb stepped out of the barn, wiping his hands on a piece of cloth. "She's all yours now," he said with a small smile, nodding toward Daisy, Lila's horse, who was eating hay contently. "She's tougher than she looks, kind of like her owner." Lila smiled, a little shy but grateful. "I don't know about that. I still have a lot to learn." He tilted his head. "We both do. Life's a school that never lets out." They shared a small laugh, but beneath that laughter was an unspoken truth. Life was about to get harder. There were no servants, no steady income, no family support. Every meal, every piece of firewood, every drop of water, they had to earn it. Caleb's ranch was small but full of potential. The fences were broken in some places, the barn roof leaked, and the well needed repair. But the land was rich and the air carried promise. Lila looked around and felt something stir inside her. Determination. This was where she would build her life. That first week tested her strength. She woke before dawn to milk the cows, fed the chickens, washed clothes by hand, and helped Caleb fix fences. Her hands, once soft, became rough and red from work. Yet every time she saw Caleb look at her with quiet pride, her tiredness faded. At night they would sit by the fire talking softly. Caleb would tell her stories about his childhood, about how he learned to ride bareback before he could even write his name, and how his mother always told him, "A kind man is the richest man in the room." Lila listened with a gentle smile. "She sounds like a wonderful woman." "She was," he said softly, his eyes distant. "She believed in people more than they believed in themselves." Lila looked at the flames, her heart warm. "Then she'd be proud of you." Caleb looked at her for a moment, his expression softening. "And I think your father would be proud too one day." She smiled faintly, though her heart still ached at the thought of him. "Maybe," she whispered. "But even if he never is, I want to live in a way that I'll never be ashamed of." Caleb reached over and gently held her hand. "You already are." As the months passed, they began building a small life together. They planted a garden, repaired the fences, and started raising a few more horses. The work was hard, but it brought them closer. The laughter they shared over small things, the way Caleb teased her when she fell into a pile of hay, or the way she surprised him by cooking his favorite stew perfectly, made each day special. But not everyone in town looked kindly at their union. People talked. Whispers followed them at the market about the Bennett girl who ran away with a cowboy. Some said she was foolish. Others said she was brave. Lila tried to ignore them, but sometimes the words hurt. One afternoon, while buying flour at the general store, she overheard two women whispering near the counter. "She used to be the Bennett girl, right?" one said. "Her father must be ashamed." The other chuckled quietly. "A real disgrace marrying a ranch hand. She threw away everything for a man with nothing." Lila froze. Her hands trembled as she placed the flour on the counter. The shopkeeper, an older man named Mr. Hayes, noticed her silence and gave her a kind smile. "Don't you mind them, miss. Folks love talking when they've got nothing better to do." Lila nodded, forcing a smile, but as she walked home, her chest felt heavy. When she reached the ranch, Caleb saw the sadness in her eyes. "What happened?" he asked softly. She hesitated, then shook her head. "Just people talking." Caleb stepped closer. "What did they say?" "That I threw my life away," she whispered. "That I'm a disgrace." Caleb looked at her with quiet strength. "Lila, people will always talk. But their words don't build your life, you do. Every nail you hammer, every seed you plant, every act of love you give, it all matters more than gossip." She looked up at him, tears shining in her eyes. "You really believe that?" He smiled gently. "I do. Because I see it every day when I look at you." Those words stayed with her. From that day on, she decided not to let others define her. Instead, she worked harder. She learned to ride like a rancher, to care for the animals, to manage the books, and to handle everything that came her way. One morning, a letter arrived. It was from a distant cousin, bringing news from her hometown. Her father was still angry, refusing to speak her name. But her younger brother, Samuel, had written a small note at the bottom. "I miss you. Lila. The house feels empty without you." Lila read those words over and over, tears filling her eyes. Caleb found her sitting quietly by the window, the letter trembling in her hands. "Bad news?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "Just memories. I miss them, Caleb. Even after everything, I still do." He knelt beside her, his voice calm. "Missing them doesn't mean you made a mistake. It means you still care. That's what makes you different." Lila wiped her tears. "I hope one day he'll see that I'm not his shame. I'm still his daughter," Caleb nodded. "And when that day comes, he'll realize you never stopped being his pride." Months turned into a year. The ranch slowly began to thrive. They sold horses, grew vegetables, and earned enough to fix the roof and paint the house. Lila started baking bread for the nearby townsfolk, and soon people began to speak differently about her. "She's strong," they said. "That girl built something from nothing." But even with the good days, there were nights of struggle. Sometimes storms would destroy their crops. Sometimes they'd lose animals. But every challenge brought them closer. Caleb's steady faith kept her going. One night, as they sat under the stars, Lila whispered, "Do you ever regret it? Choosing me when you could have had an easier life?" Caleb looked at her, smiling softly. "Lila, you don't choose love because it's easy. You choose it because it's worth it." She smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Then I hope we keep choosing it no matter what comes." He placed his arm around her. Always. That night, Lila dreamt of her father. In her dream, he stood at the edge of the farm, watching her work beside Caleb. His face was neither angry nor kind, just tired. When she woke up, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. The next morning, as she looked out over the land they had built together, she felt a quiet strength in her heart. She was no longer the frightened girl who ran through the storm. She was a woman now, a wife, a worker, and someone who had faced life's hardest choices and still stood tall. She knew the journey wasn't over. There were still fences to mend, wounds to heal, and hearts to forgive. But for the first time, she truly believed that love could be stronger than pride, and that maybe, someday, even her father would see it too. Years passed on the small ranch, and life continued to teach Lila and Caleb lessons that were hard, yet full of meaning. The early days of struggle had given way to routine and quiet strength. Lila had become a woman of resilience, capable of running the ranch alongside Caleb. She could ride hard across rough trails, mend fences, tend to the horses, and even manage the books for their growing business. She had learned to find joy in small victories, like a fence that no longer wobbled, a horse that finally obeyed, a command, or a neighbor stopping by to buy a basket of her vegetables. Caleb never left her side. Through storms, droughts, and lonely nights, he stayed steady, never wavering in his love or his faith in her. He had a quiet way of making everything feel right, even when life seemed against them. Lila often marveled at his patience and how he always seemed to know when she needed encouragement, a laugh, or just someone to sit in silence with her. But life on the ranch was never simple. One particularly harsh summer, the sun blazed without mercy for weeks. The grass turned brown, the river's water shrank to a trickle, and the cattle grew restless and weak. The ranch's small income was stretched thin as Caleb and Lila worked tirelessly to feed their animals and protect their crops. Every day was a battle against heat, hunger, and exhaustion. Lila rose before dawn as usual, carrying buckets of water to the animals. Sweat dripped down her forehead, soaking her hair and clothes. She paused for a moment, looking at the parched land and thinking of her father. She wondered if he ever realized that pride alone couldn't survive such challenges, and that hard work and love were what truly mattered. Caleb appeared beside her, carrying more feed. "We'll make it through," he said softly. "We always do." Lila smiled faintly, though her arms ached from lifting the heavy buckets. "I just wish it wasn't so hard all the time." He took her hand, roughened from work. "It's hard because we're doing something worth doing. Nothing good comes easy." Her heart swelled at his words. He was right. Every drop of sweat, every aching muscle, every long day in the sun, it all meant they were building something real, something lasting. One evening, As the sun dipped low behind the mountains, a letter arrived that made Lila's heart skip a beat. Caleb handed it to her gently. "From home?" he asked. She took it with trembling hands. The envelope was familiar, the handwriting unmistakably her father's. Her chest tightened as she opened it. Inside, she found a few pages of words that made her breath catch. Thomas Bennett was ill. His health had been failing for months, and he had begun to realize the weight of his anger and pride. In the letter, he wrote that he regretted calling her a disgrace, that he wished he had seen her for the strong, courageous woman she had become. At the end of the letter, in smaller letters, was a plea. "Come home, Lila. I want to see you before it's too late." Lila folded the letter carefully, tears filling her eyes. She sat silently for a long time, thinking. She had not heard her father's voice in years, and yet she felt a pull in her heart. She remembered the small moments of childhood, the laughter, the warmth, and the times when her father's pride softened into affection. But she also remembered the hurt, the words that had cut deep, and the long nights of feeling alone in her own home. Caleb knelt beside her, his hand on hers. "Do you want to go?" he asked gently. She looked up at him, uncertain. "I don't know if I'm ready, but I think I need to." He smiled softly. "Then we'll go together. Whatever happens, you won't face it alone." A few days later, Lila and Caleb rode the horses that had carried them through so many storms toward the Bennett farm. The ride was long, and Lila's heart raced with every step closer to her past. She tried to prepare herself for the meeting, but her emotions were a tangled mix of fear, hope, and sorrow. When they arrived, the farm looked the same, yet older somehow. The fences needed repairs and the house's paint had begun to peel, but there was a familiar warmth in the sunlight on the porch and the scent of the earth she had grown up with. Thomas Bennett was waiting on the porch, frail and slower than she remembered. His eyes were tired, but when he saw her, there was a flicker of recognition and longing. "Lila," he whispered, his voice shaking. She approached slowly, her heart pounding. "Father," she said softly. He reached out a trembling hand. I was wrong. I see it now. You were never a disgrace. I didn't understand what strength truly meant." Tears filled her eyes and she took his hand. "I understand, Father. I only wish it hadn't taken so long for you to see." He nodded, his voice catching. "I've missed so much, but I want you to know I'm proud of you, of everything you've built, and of the life you've made with Caleb." Caleb stepped forward, tipping his hat respectfully. "Sir," he said quietly, "I've always tried to care for your daughter the way she deserves. I only hope I've done well enough." Thomas studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "You have. More than I could have imagined." Lila felt a warmth she hadn't felt in years. Forgiveness didn't erase the past, but it healed the heart in ways that words alone could not. She spent the afternoon helping her father inside the house, sharing stories of the ranch and listening to his reflections on the years they had lost. In the following weeks, Lila found herself torn between the ranch she had built with Caleb and the family she had almost left behind. But she also realized something important. Her past and present could coexist. She could be a strong, independent woman, loyal to her own life and love, while also honoring the family she came from. Caleb was patient, supporting her in every decision. He helped her mend fences, tend crops, and organize the horses, but he also encouraged her to spend time with her father, to reconcile and build a new understanding. Their love had been tested before, and now it proved its strength again. Through it all, the town slowly began to recognize Lila's courage and resilience. Where once they had whispered about the disgrace of the Bennett girl, they now spoke of her as a woman of determination and compassion. People came to her for advice on raising horses, tending gardens, and even handling the difficulties of farm life. Lila and Caleb continued to build their ranch, but now there was a deeper purpose. They began helping neighbors who were struggling, training young riders, and offering care for lost or abandoned horses. Their home became a place where kindness mattered more than wealth and where love was stronger than judgment. One evening, Lila and Caleb stood together on the porch watching the sun dip below the mountains. The fields glowed with a golden light, the horses grazed quietly, and the wind carried the fresh scent of rain from the afternoon storm. "Do you ever think about the past?" Lila asked softly. Caleb smiled, his arm around her. "I do, but I try not to dwell on it. The past shapes us, yes, but it doesn't control the life we live now." She nodded. "I'm glad I came back. Not just for him, but for me. I needed to see that forgiveness can be stronger than anger." He kissed her forehead gently. "And that love can heal even the deepest wounds." Lila looked out at the land that stretched before her. She had endured storms, heartbreak, and doubt. Yet she had emerged stronger. She had found love, purpose, and courage, and she knew that no matter what challenges came next, she could face them. In the quiet of that evening, with Caleb beside her and the world glowing around them, Lila understood something profound. Strength was not about pride or control. Strength was about love, forgiveness, and the courage to keep moving forward even when the world seemed against you. And as the stars began to twinkle in the sky, she felt at peace. She had found her place, her family, and her home, not just in the land she worked, but in the love that had carried her through every storm. The years on the ranch passed quietly, but not without their own small adventures and challenges. Lila and Caleb had grown into a strong team, each day building a life that was both simple and full of meaning. They woke before dawn, tended to the animals, and worked the land, yet every day also held moments of laughter, shared dreams, and quiet reflection. Their love had deepened with each passing season. The challenges that once seemed overwhelming, the storms, the droughts, the long hours of work, had only brought them closer. Lila no longer feared hardship. She knew that whatever came, she and Caleb could face it together. They had learned to rely on each other completely, to trust in their shared strength and dedication. One autumn morning, as the first frost brushed the grass, Lila stood outside with a basket of fresh eggs. She looked across the rolling hills, watching the horses graze peacefully. For a moment, she allowed herself to remember the girl she had once been, the girl who had run from her father's anger, who had felt small and ashamed, and who had feared a life without love. She smiled softly, realizing how far she had come. The shame her father had once spoken of no longer held power over her. Instead, she carried pride, not pride in wealth or status, but pride in courage, resilience, and the life she had built with Caleb. She had proven, first to herself and then to the world, that love and determination could shape a future stronger than fear. Caleb came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Thinking about the past?" he asked, his voice gentle. "Always," she admitted, "but now it feels different. The past doesn't weigh me down anymore. It taught me and it brought me here." He kissed the top of her head. "And what a wonderful place you've built. I wouldn't trade this life for anything." The ranch had grown over the years. Lila and Caleb had added a small training area for young horses, a barn for rescued animals, and even a little garden where children from the town could come and learn about planting and caring for the earth. Their neighbors began to see the ranch as more than just a place of work. It had become a place of learning, kindness, and second chances, a reflection of the lives they had built through patience, love, and effort. People often asked Lila how she had endured the hardships. Her answer was always the same. Love made it possible, and courage to keep moving forward, even when the world seemed against me. She began to tell her story to the young girls in the town, to show them that being called a disgrace, or judged harshly, did not define who they were. "You are stronger than anyone can see," she would say, "and your life is yours to shape." Caleb would stand beside her, proud and silent, letting her words inspire others while his steady presence reminded everyone that love and partnership were powerful forces. One winter, a letter arrived that changed everything once more. It was from her father, Thomas Bennett, who had grown frail but whose mind remained clear. He had reflected on his life, realizing that pride and stubbornness had kept him from the happiness he could have shared with his daughter. He wrote that he was proud of Lila, proud of the life she had built, and proud of the woman she had become. Lila held the letter in her hands, tears streaming down her face. "He finally understands," she whispered to Caleb. He took her hand gently. He's proud of you, but remember, you built this life for yourself. His recognition is a gift, not the reason you succeeded. She nodded, knowing he was right. Her life was not defined by her father's opinion, but by her own choices, her courage, and her ability to love deeply and fiercely. The years continued to pass, and the ranch flourished. Lila and Caleb worked side by side, each day teaching each other new lessons. They became known throughout the town not just as ranchers, but as people who embodied integrity, kindness, and resilience. Young couples came to them for advice. Children visited to learn about animals, and neighbors sought their help in times of trouble. Through it all, Lila remained humble. She never forgot the storms she had endured, both literal and metaphorical, and she carried that memory as a reminder of what was truly important. She often stood on the porch at sunset, watching the sky turn gold and pink, thinking about the journey she had traveled. The pain, the fear, the shame. All of it had been transformed into strength and wisdom. Caleb would stand beside her, usually in silence, letting her thoughts flow. Sometimes he would speak quietly with warmth in his voice. Look at what you've built, Lila. This is more than a ranch. It's a home, a place of hope and proof that courage and love can overcome anything. She would smile and rest her hand on his arm. It's ours, she would say. Every part of it. The hardships, the love, the choices, it's all ours. Years later, when the sun was low in the sky and the ranch glowed with the soft light of evening, Lila and Caleb sat on the porch watching the horses graze. Their hair had begun to show streaks of gray, and the lines on their faces told stories of hard work and quiet perseverance. Yet their hearts were still young, filled with love for each other and for the life they had built. A young girl from town approached them, carrying a notebook. She looked shy, but her eyes were full of curiosity. "Miss Lila," she said softly, "could you tell me your story? About how you became brave?" Lila smiled warmly. "I can," she said. "But the truth is, bravery isn't about never being scared. It's about facing your fears even when the world tells you that you're wrong or weak. And it's about choosing love when it's easier to give up." Caleb nodded beside her. "And sometimes it's about standing by the person you love no matter what storms come your way." The girl listened intently, her eyes wide. "Did people call you a disgrace?" she asked softly. "Yes," Lila admitted. "But I learned that words cannot define you. Only your choices and actions define who you are. And that's what makes a life worth living." The girl nodded thoughtfully and ran off, inspired by the story she had heard. Lila watched her go, feeling a quiet satisfaction. Her life, once filled with uncertainty and fear, had become a source of hope for others. As the years went on, Lila and Caleb grew older together, their love deepening with each shared memory. They celebrated small victories, comforted each other during losses, and continued to build the ranch into a place of care and opportunity. Even after her father passed away peacefully, Lila carried no bitterness in her heart. She had forgiven him fully, understanding that people grow and learn at their own pace. The reconciliation had brought her peace, and the legacy of love and resilience she shared with Caleb and the ranch became her true inheritance. In the evenings, she often stood on the porch watching the horizon, the golden fields, and the horses that had become part of their family. She reflected on the journey that had brought her here, the pain, the love, the courage, the heartbreak, and the hope that had guided her through every storm. She had been a girl once told she was a disgrace. Now she was a woman known for strength, kindness, and the quiet power of enduring love. The life she had built with Caleb was more than a home. It was a testament to the idea that love, courage, and forgiveness could transform even the most difficult circumstances into something beautiful. As the sun dipped below the mountains and the sky turned pink and gold, Lila took Caleb's hand. "We did it," she whispered. He smiled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "We did," he said. "And we'll keep doing it together." The ranch, the life, and the love they shared stood as proof that no matter the hardships, no matter the words spoken against you, the heart that chooses courage and love will always find its way home. And so Lila's story ended not with disgrace, but with triumph, a life of love, purpose, and lasting strength.